Ethan Carter sat in his corner office on the 17th floor of the company headquarters in the heart of the city, the early morning sun streaming through the large window and glinting off his polished walnut desk. In front of him sat a cold cup of coffee and a thick stack of reports, numbers, and charts he'd been staring at for the better part of the week. At 38, Ethan was the founder and CEO of Carter's Hearth, a chain of 13 small diners scattered across the Midwest. He'd built it from nothing, starting with a single roadside joint 10 years ago, where he'd wiped tables and flipped burgers himself, to a brand he proudly called a place for families to gather. But this morning, as the light shimmered off the skyscrapers outside, an uneasy feeling gnawed at him, one he couldn't quite shake. He flipped through the latest batch of reports from his regional managers, the ones who kept assuring him everything was fine. Revenue was decent enough to keep shareholders happy, but something was off. The fine print in the customer feedback section hit him like a punch to the gut. Service slower than a turtle. Staff wouldn't even crack a smile. Waited 20 minutes just for a glass of water. Worse still, employee turnover was at an all-time high. Nearly a third of his workforce had quit in the past year. Ethan tapped his fingers on the desk, a steady rhythm like the ticking of the wall clock. He'd called 3 regional managers last week, and they'd all said the same thing. Just a little hiccup, boss. We've got it under control. But now, those words sounded like wind whistling through an empty room, hollow and meaningless. Ethan took a sip of the cold coffee, winced, and set the cup aside. He stood, walked to the window, and gazed down at the bustling traffic below. His mind drifted back to the day he opened the first Carter's Hearth. The smell of fresh baked bread, the chatter of customers filling the wooden booths, the bright grins of the first employees he'd hired. He'd promised himself this wouldn't just be a money-making chain. It'd be a special place, where people felt welcomed, from the kid begging for extra ketchup to the old lady spinning tales of yesteryear. Yet now, the emails and messages trickling in from customers painted a picture of disappointment, even anger. What had happened to his dream? Who was unraveling it right under his nose while he sat clueless? That question stuck in his mind like a stubborn nail. He turned back to his desk, grabbed a notepad, and started scribbling locations, dates, specific complaints. One diner in a suburban town, 2 hours from headquarters, popped up more than the rest. Morning staff rude as hell. Waited 30 minutes for food. Manager yelling right in front of us. Ethan paused, staring at the name. Carter's Hearth, Elmwood. He'd never been there in person, relying instead on the regional manager's glossy updates. But numbers didn't lie, and the whispers from customers spoke even louder. Heat surged up his spine, not anger, but resolve. He needed to see it for himself, hear it with his own ears. No more reports, no middlemen. He'd uncover the truth firsthand. Ethan stood again, this time heading to the office closet in the corner. He pulled out an old gray hoodie, the kind he'd worn as a broke college kid, and a pair of faded jeans. He caught his reflection in the mirror, dark hair messy, a scruffy beard from days without shaving, nothing like the sleek CEO on the company website. He smirked faintly, grabbing a pair of thick-rimmed glasses from a drawer, relics from his college days before he switched to contacts. With a baseball cap tugged low, Ethan barely recognized himself. Perfect. No employee at Elmwood had ever met him face to face. He'd always delegated to the regional managers. This was his chance to slip into their world unnoticed, a ghost, hunting for answers. He left the office, telling no one except Laura Bennett, his trusted assistant. "Lavra, clear my afternoon," he said over the phone as he stepped into the elevator. "I need to step out for a bit." Laura, calm as ever, replied, "Got it, boss. Need me to prep anything?" Ethan hesitated for a second, then said, "Not yet. I'll let you know." He hung up, strode out to the parking lot, and climbed into his black SUV. Its hood dusted with a thin layer of grime. 2 hours to Elmwood was nothing. The real challenge was what he'd find when he got there. As Ethan drove through the quiet suburban roads, the sun climbed higher, casting light through the canopy of trees. Elmwood came into view, a small town with white wooden houses and a handful of shops dotting the main strip. Carter's Hearth sat at the corner of the street, its red and white sign faded but still bold against the midday bustle. Ethan parked a block away, not wanting to draw eyes. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and stepped out, his old sneakers squeaking against the pavement. The door jingled as he pushed it open, and a wave of noise hit him, chatter buzzing, dishes clinking, a burst of laughter from a nearby table. Lunch hour was in full swing, but Ethan sensed something off. He glanced around. The floor was clean, but the vinyl booths were worn at the edges, the cream-colored walls peeling slightly in the corners. It wasn't dirty or rundown, but it wasn't the warm, inviting space he'd envisioned when he laid the first brick for this chain. Ethan frowned, pulled his cap lower, and slid into a booth near the window, where he could watch without being noticed. A young woman approached, her eyes tired, but her smile forced into place. Her name tag read, Sarah. "Hi there, welcome," she said, her voice cheerful but strained, like she'd recited it 100 times already. "What can I get you started with?" Ethan studied her hair tied high, a few strands loose across her forehead, faint shadows under her eyes. Something about the way she stood, shoulders slightly hunched, hands gripping a small notepad, set him on edge. "Just coffee, thanks," he replied, keeping his tone low and casual, then settled into the seat. Tugging his cap down a bit more, Sarah nodded, spun on her heel, and darted off through the maze of tables. Ethan watched her go. She moved with practiced ease, dodging chairs, balancing a tray of drinks in one hand while scribbling orders with the other. She was clearly skilled, but something in the way she glanced toward the kitchen caught his attention. He pressed his lips together, telling himself he might be reading too much into it. But when Sarah returned with his coffee, setting it down with a soft clack, Ethan couldn't ignore it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and he wondered what was hiding behind that smile that he hadn't yet seen. Ethan Carter leaned back in the warm booth, the vinyl creaking under him as he cradled the warm coffee mug in his hands. The diner buzzed around him, forks scraped plates, voices overlapped in a steady hum, and the faint sizzle of the grill drifted from the kitchen. From his spot by the window, he had a clear view of Sarah weaving between tables, her movements quick but heavy, like she was dragging an invisible weight. She refilled a glass of iced tea for an older couple, flashed that strained smile of hers, and darted off to grab a stack of menus for a family of 4. Ethan sipped his coffee, the bitterness sharp on his tongue, and narrowed his eyes. She was damn good at keeping the chaos under control, but there was something off, something he couldn't pin down yet. He set the mug down and pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll while his gaze stayed fixed on the room. A family in the booth behind him muttered about their food taking too long. 15 minutes for pancakes. Ridiculous, the dad grumbled. 2 teenagers at a table nearby whispered, heads close together, one of them nodding toward the kitchen with a smirk. "That guy snapped at her again," the girl said, barely audible. "Total jerk." Ethan's grip tightened on his phone. This wasn't the Carter's Hearth. He'd built a place where people left with full stomachs and smiles. It felt tense, frayed at the edges, like a string about to snap. Sarah swung by again, her notepad tucked under her arm. "Ready to order?" she asked, her voice still carrying that forced cheer. Ethan glanced up, catching the faint tremble in her fingers as she held her pen. "Yeah, I'll take a burger and fries," he said, keeping his tone easy, testing her reaction. She scribbled it down fast, nodded, and hurried off, her sneakers squeaking against the tile. Ethan watched her go, noting how she paused at the kitchen window, shoulders stiffening for a split second before she called out the order. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Whatever was wrong here, it wasn't just about slow service. A moment later, a loud voice cut through the diner's noise like a crack of thunder. "Sarah, what's taking so damn long? You're falling behind again." Ethan's head snapped toward the kitchen. A short, stocky man in his 40s stormed into view, his stained apron stretched tight over his gut, his face flushed red. He didn't bother introducing himself as he barreled past a table of customers, his eyes locked on Sarah. Ethan pegged him as the shift manager, Greg. Maybe, based on the complaints he'd read. Sarah flinched at the sound, her pen freezing midair, but she recovered fast. "Coming right up," she called back, her voice cracking just enough for Ethan to catch it. She turned away, disappearing into the kitchen, but not before Ethan saw the flicker of strain cross her face. He frowned, his coffee forgotten. He'd started this company with a clear rule: treat people right, customers and staff alike. Number. Yelling, no belittling, none of this crap. Yet here was this guy, Greg. He'd bet money on it, tearing into Sarah like she was a machine, not a person, and doing it where everyone could hear. Ethan's jaw tightened. He took another sip, forcing himself to stay calm, to keep watching. He wasn't here to blow his cover, not yet. But the itch to step in was growing, clawing at him with every second. When Sarah returned with his burger, the plate clattered softly as she set it down. "Sorry about the wait," she said, her voice low, her eyes dodging his. She looked like she wanted to shrink into the floor. Ethan offered a small smile, testing the waters again. "No worries. You're doing great out there." Her head jerked up, surprise flashing in her tired eyes. And for a split second, her smile softened, almost real, before she nodded and hustled off. Ethan watched her go, then took a bite of the burger. It was decent, nothing special, but his appetite was gone. Something else had caught his attention, muffled sobbing, faint but unmistakable, leaking through the thin wall separating the dining area from the kitchen. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, and strained to listen. The sobs grew clearer, punctuated by a shaky voice, Sarah's. "I'm trying my best, okay?" she said, her words breaking apart. "I haven't had a break in 6 hours, and I'm doing everything I can." Ethan's stomach twisted. Then came the response. Greg's voice, sharp and dismissive, slicing through her plea like a blade. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're in the wrong job. We don't have time for excuses." The words hit Ethan like a slap. He set his fork down, slow and deliberate, his pulse thudding in his ears. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a breakdown, and it was happening in his diner. He couldn't sit still anymore. Sliding out of the booth, he left his half-eaten burger behind and walked toward the kitchen door, his sneakers silent on the tile. He pushed it open just enough to peek inside, and what he saw made his chest tighten. Sarah stood near the prep counter, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Greg loomed over her, arms crossed, his face twisted in frustration, a bully in a cheap apron. Two cooks stood off to the side, heads down, clearly uncomfortable, but too scared or too jaded to step in. Ethan clenched his fists, his heart pounding. This wasn't the company he'd poured his life into. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, stepping fully into the kitchen, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Greg spun around, startled, his brows knitting together. No, just a little miscommunication," he said, waving a hand like it was nothing. Sarah shook her head, tears still pooling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible, her gaze fixed on the floor. Ethan looked at her, then back at Greg. He wasn't ready to reveal who was not yet, but he couldn't let this slide. "She looks like she needs a break," he said evenly. "Why don't you let her sit down for a few minutes?" Greg scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. "We're short-staffed. There's no time for breaks during the rush." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone steady. "There's always time to treat people with respect." The air in the kitchen thickened, heavy with unspoken challenge. Greg's eyes narrowed, his bravado faltering for a moment as he sized Ethan up. Before he could snap back, one of the cooks, a wiry young guy with a nervous edge, spoke up. "Sarah's been non-stop since she clocked in," he said, his voice hesitant but firm. "She hasn't even had time to grab a drink of water." Greg shot the kid a glare. "Stay out of it, Tyler. Focus on your station." Ethan's gaze flicked to the cook Tyler, then back to Greg. "And who's in charge of making sure your team can focus?" he asked, his voice low but pointed. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like the pressure's coming from how this place is being run." Greg's face flushed, his confidence slipping, but he tried to hold his ground. "Look, I'm just doing my job. If people can't handle it, that's not on me." Ethan's eyes hardened. "We'll see about that." Sarah, still wiping her eyes, glanced at Ethan with a mix of confusion and something like gratitude. "I'll be fine," she muttered, though her voice wavered. She started toward the door, but Ethan stepped in front of her gently. "Take 5, he said, soft but insistent. "You've earned it." Greg opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan held up a hand, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She's taking a break. Now." Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting between Ethan and Greg, then nodded and slipped past the swinging kitchen doors. Ethan turned back to Greg, his voice dropping to a steely calm. "What's your name?" Greg folded his arms, defensive. "Rick Greg Sullivan." "And who are you to come in here and tell me how to run my shift?" Ethan ignored the question. "How long have you been manager here, Greg?" Greg shifted his weight, bristling. "About 2 years. I've kept this place running just fine, so I don't need some random customer stepping in. You call this fine?" Ethan cut in, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "Your staff's overworked. Your customers are complaining. And you're berating people in the middle of their shifts. That's not fine. It's a mess." Greg opened his mouth, ready to argue, but Ethan didn't give him the chance. "You might want to think about how you're treating people," he said, locking eyes with him. "Because I guarantee if I were your boss, this wouldn't fly." Greg's face paled, but he masked it with a scoff. "Right, well, you're not my boss." So, before he could finish, the kitchen doors swung open again, and Sarah reappeared, her face a little more composed, but her shoulders still slumped. She kept her head down as she brushed past Greg and headed back to the dining area. Ethan gave Greg one last hard look, then turned and followed her out. He wasn't done here or not, by a long shot, but for now, he'd step back and watch. He needed more than a hunch to act. He needed proof. Back in his booth, Ethan picked up his cold coffee and took a sip, his eyes tracking Sarah as she returned to her routine. She moved slower now, her exhaustion plain as day, but she still managed a small smile for every customer she served. Ethan noticed her lingering at a table with a young mom struggling to keep her toddler busy, slipping the kid some crayons and a paper menu to scribble on. He also caught Greg glaring at her from the kitchen window, his arms crossed, his scowl deepening. Ethan pulled out his phone again, this time opening a notes app. He started typing Greg's behavior, Sarah's workload, the customer complaints, Tyler's quiet stand. Every detail mattered. When he finished his meal, Ethan flagged Sarah down. "Can I get the check?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She nodded and hurried off, returning with the receipt tucked into a worn billfold. "Thanks for stopping by," she said quietly. "Sorry again about earlier." Ethan slipped some cash inside, more than the total, and looked up at her. "No. Need to apologize. You're doing great." Her cheeks flushed faintly, and she offered a small, genuine smile, the first real one he'd seen from her before walking away. Ethan stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. But before stepping outside, he paused and glanced back. At the dining room, Sarah was refilling a customer's coffee, her movements careful but steady. Greg barked something at Tyler in the kitchen, his voice carrying over the hum of the diner. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pushed the door open and stepped into the cool afternoon air, pulling out his phone as he walked to his car. "Lavra," he said when his assistant picked up. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow, and get me everything we have on the Elmwood location, employee files, performance reviews, all of it." Lavra didn't miss a beat. "Got it? Anything else?" Ethan looked back at the diner one last time, the faded sign swaying faintly in the breeze. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm. "Make sure my regional managers are ready for a meeting. We need to talk." He hung up, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine, his mind already racing. Tomorrow he wouldn't just watch. Tomorrow he'd act. Ethan Carter pulled into the Elmwood Diner's parking lot, just as the sun peeked over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the faded Carter's Hearth sign. It was early, barely past opening time, and the lot was mostly empty, save for a rusty pickup truck and a beat-up sedan. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying yesterday's scenes like a broken record. Sarah's trembling hands, Greg's barking voice, the stifling tension that hung over the place like a storm cloud. Today wasn't about sitting back anymore. Today, he'd do more than observe. He adjusted his cap. The same scruffy disguise from the day before, hoodie, jeans, thick-rimmed glasses, still cloaking him in anonymity. But this time, he carried a small notebook tucked in his pocket, its pages already scribbled with notes from yesterday. He stepped out of the SUV, the morning chill biting at his face, and walked toward the diner with a steady, determined stride. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open, and the quiet hit him none of the lunch rush chaos yet, just the hum of a coffee machine and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. A handful of customers dotted the room. An old man nursing a mug at the counter, a young woman scrolling her phone in a corner booth. Sarah was already on the floor, moving slower than yesterday, her apron tied loosely around her waist. She carried a coffee pot, refilling the old man's mug with a small, tired smile. Ethan slid into the same booth by the window, watching her closely. The shadows under her eyes were darker now. Her shoulders slumped like she'd been carrying the weight of the world all night. She hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on keeping her routine steady. Greg was nowhere in sight, probably in the back, Ethan figured, but Tyler peeked out from the kitchen window, his wiry frame bent over a cutting board, chopping onions. With quick practice flicks of his knife, Ethan waited until Sarah passed by with the coffee pot before calling her over. "Hey, Sarah," he said, keeping his tone casual, like any regular customer. She paused, blinking at him, clearly caught off guard that he knew her name. Sure, but I can't stay long," she said, glancing around the sparse dining area. "We're short-staffed again." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, and Ethan caught the faint tremble in it. "I won't keep you," he promised, leaning forward slightly. "Just wanted to ask, how long have you been working here?" She frowned, her brow creasing as if the question threw her off balance. "About 8 months," she said, hesitating. "Why?" Ethan lowered his voice, keeping it gentle but probing. "You seem like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Is it always this busy?" Sarah's eyes darted toward the kitchen window, then back to him, a flash of panic crossing her face. "It's not always the customers," she started, then bit her lip, stopping herself. "Sometimes it's—" She trailed off, her fingers tightening around the coffee pot. "It's Greg, isn't it?" Ethan asked, his tone soft but direct. Her head snapped up, wide-eyed, like he'd just read her mind. I shouldn't, she stammered, but Ethan cut in, keeping his voice steady. You don't have to say anything. I just want to understand what it's like for you here. Sarah hesitated, then let out a quiet sigh, her shoulders sagging. It's not just him. It's everything. We're always short-staffed, and when things get hectic, he just makes it worse. I know he's under pressure too, but it feels like we're the ones paying for it. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He pushed a little further. What about Tyler? He seems like he tries to help. Sarah's expression softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through her exhaustion. Tyler's great. He's only been here a few months, but he's one of the few who actually cares. He covers for people when they're struggling. Honestly, if it weren't for him, I probably would have quit by now. Before Ethan could dig deeper, the kitchen door swung open with a loud bang, and Greg strode out, his presence sucking the air out of the room like a vacuum. Sarah's shoulders tensed instantly, and she muttered a quick, "I gotta go," before hurrying off to refill the old man's coffee. Greg didn't seem to notice Ethan, his focus locked on Tyler in the kitchen. "Pick up the pace, Hayes," he barked, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of the diner. "We've got lunch prep to finish." Tyler nodded silently, his knife moving faster, but his jaw tightened. Ethan's fingers curled into fists under the table. This wasn't stress. This was a pattern, a toxic one, and it was rotting his diner from the inside. He let the morning unfold, sipping his coffee and jotting notes discreetly. The pace picked up as the lunch rush trickled in, tables filled, orders stacked up, and Sarah darted between them, her exhaustion more obvious with every step. Greg hovered like a shadow, barking at Tyler 1 minute, then disappearing into the back, only to re-emerge with a scowl. Ethan watched it all, his anger simmering, but he held it in check. He needed the right moment, something concrete to act on. That moment came an hour later. A customer, an older man in a flannel shirt, flagged Sarah down, his voice gruff. "These eggs are overcooked," he complained, pushing his plate toward her. "Can't you people get it right?" Sarah's face flushed, but she kept her cool. "I'm really sorry about that," she said, her tone steady. "I'll get it fixed right away." She turned to head back to the kitchen, but Greg had already overheard, storming out like a bull charging a red flag. "What's the problem here?" he demanded, glaring at Sarah as if she'd personally insulted him. The customer waved him off. "It's fine, she's handling it," he said, clearly annoyed. But Greg didn't let it go. He rounded on Sarah, his voice rising. "How many times do I have to tell you to double-check the orders before they go out? This is basic stuff." Sarah shrank back, her hands clutching the plate, but she nodded. Quickly, "I'll take care of it," she murmured, hurrying toward the kitchen. Ethan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, the sound sharp enough to turn every head in the diner. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the room like a blade. Greg spun around, his face twisting in annoyance. "And who the hell do you think you are?" he snapped, stepping closer, his apron straining against his chest. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and flipped it open to reveal his company ID. He held Greg's gaze, unblinking. "I'm Ethan Carter," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I own this diner and 12 others just like it." The room went dead silent. Sarah froze mid-step, the plate still in her hands, her eyes wide with shock. Tyler poked his head out from the kitchen, his knife hovering over the cutting board. Even the customers paused, forks halfway to their mouths, staring at the scruffy guy in the hoodie who'd just dropped a bombshell. Greg's face drained of color, then flushed red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't realize," he stammered, but Ethan cut him off, his tone icy. "No, You didn't, he said, stepping closer. Because if you had, you wouldn't be treating my staff like this, or my customers. Greg took a step back, his bravado crumbling, but Ethan didn't let up. Let's talk in the back. He jerked his head toward the office door, his voice leaving no room for argument. Greg hesitated, then nodded stiffly, trudging toward the kitchen like a kid caught stealing. Ethan followed, pausing only to glance at Sarah. I won't let this slide, he said quietly, just for her ears. She nodded, still stunned, clutching the plate like a lifeline dot in the cramped office. Ethan shut the door with a soft click and turned to Greg, who stood with his arms crossed, defiance flickering in his eyes. Do you have any idea how out of line you've been? Ethan asked, his voice low but firm, cutting through the stale air. Greg opened his mouth, but Ethan held up a hand. Save it. I've seen enough. You've been with this company for 2 years, and in that time, you've turned this place into a pressure cooker. Your staff's falling apart. Your customers are walking out unhappy. Do you have any clue what that does to morale? To the business? Greg swallowed hard, his bravado melting away. I can do better, he said, his voice shaky. Ethan cut him off again, his tone final. You're done. I'm letting you go, effective immediately. Greg's head shot up, his eyes bulging. Wait, you can't. I can, Ethan said, stepping closer, his voice steady as stone. And I will. HR will process your severance. But you're no longer part of this company. Greg stood there, frozen, his hands dropping to his sides. After a long, tense moment, he nodded once, stiffly, and walked out of the office without another word, the door swinging shut behind him. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He didn't enjoy firing people. It wasn't why he'd started this business, but this was necessary. This was about more than one bad manager. It was about saving the soul of Carter's Hearth. He stepped back into the dining area, every eye on him, Sarah and Tyler hovering near the kitchen, the customers whispering among themselves. The tension hung thick, but there was a shift, a flicker of something new in the air. Ethan took a deep breath and addressed the room, his voice steady. I want to thank everyone here for their hard work. Things are going to change around here, starting today. He looked at Sarah and Tyler, their faces a mix of shock and cautious. Hope, you two meet me after your shift. We need to talk. The room buzzed softly, curiosity, relief, maybe even a little disbelief, but Ethan felt it, the first crack of light breaking through the gloom. He wasn't just here to fix a diner. He was here to take it back. The Elmwood Diner grew quiet as the last customer shuffled out, the bell above the door jingling faintly in the late afternoon stillness. Ethan Carter stood near the counter, his hoodie sleeves rolled up, watching the dining area empty out. The day had been a whirlwind. Greg's firing still echoed in the air, a seismic shift that left everyone reeling. The staff moved slower now, their usual rush replaced by a cautious, almost dazed rhythm. Ethan caught snippets of their whispers as they wiped tables and stacked chairs. Did that really happen? Who is that guy? He kept his expression steady, but inside his mind raced. This wasn't over, not yet. Firing Greg was just the first step. Now came the hard part. Sarah Mitchell and Tyler Hayes lingered near the kitchen, their aprons still on, waiting for him. Sarah's hands fidgeted with the hem of her apron, her eyes darting between Ethan and the floor, while Tyler stood with his arms crossed, his wiry frame tense but curious. The hum of the kitchen appliances filled the silence, a low drone that made the moment feel heavier. Ethan motioned to a booth near the back. All right, let's sit, he said, his voice calm but firm. He slid into one side, and after a beat, Sarah and Tyler exchanged a quick glance before settling across from him, their movements hesitant, like they weren't sure what to expect. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his thick-rimmed glasses slipping slightly down his nose. First off, he started looking between them. I want to say thank you. Today was rough hell. I know it's been rough for a while, but you handled yourselves with professionalism and care. That's more than I can say for some of the leadership this place has had. Sarah blinked, her lips parting slightly, while Tyler fidgeted with the edge of his apron, his brow furrowing. Neither spoke, the weight of his words hanging between them. I didn't know things had gotten this bad, Ethan admitted, his voice softening, a trace of guilt creeping in. That's on me. I've been too distant. I built this company to be a place where people feel valued, employees and customers, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. He paused, letting the confession settle. Sarah glanced at Tyler, then finally spoke, her voice small but steady. It's not all bad, she said, hesitating. I mean, I've worked worse jobs. I do love the customers, though. I just wish. She trailed off, her fingers twisting the apron tighter, unsure if she should finish. Wish what? Ethan prompted gently, leaning in a little closer. She sighed, her shoulders sagging. I just wish it felt like someone cared, you know? Really cared about us, not just the numbers or how fast we can turn tables. Her words hit Ethan like a quiet punch, echoing the promise he'd made to himself a decade ago. He nodded, letting them sink in, then turned to Tyler. What about you? Tyler looked up, his voice quiet but firm, like he'd been waiting for the chance to speak. Honestly, I didn't plan to stay long. I only started a few months ago, but I couldn't leave not with how much Sarah and the others have to deal with. Someone's gotta have their back. Ethan felt a pang of guilt twist deeper. These two were the glue holding this place together, and he'd been sitting in an office, trusting spreadsheets while they carried the load. Well, that changes now, Ethan said, his tone shifting to something solid, resolute. I'm not just going to tell you things will get better. I'm going to show you. Sarah and Tyler exchanged another look, curiosity and skepticism flickering in their eyes. Ethan straightened, his voice steady as he laid out his plan. Here's what's happening. First, I'm bringing in a new manager, someone with experience, but more importantly, someone who knows how to lead with respect. In the meantime, I'll personally oversee things here until we're back on track. Sarah's eyes widened. You mean you're staying? She asked, a mix of surprise and disbelief in her voice. Ethan nodded. For as long as it takes? Tyler tilted his head, his brow creasing. And Greg, he's not coming back? Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. He's gone for good. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior, and neither should you. Tyler let out a small breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly, while Sarah's hand stilled, a faint relief washing over her face. Second, Ethan continued, I'm revisiting the staffing structure. No more running short during peak hours. We'll hire more people, and I'll make sure everyone gets proper breaks. You can't take care of customers if you're running out fumes. Sarah's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. That'd be amazing, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, like she couldn't quite believe it. Ethan nodded, then softened his tone. And third, I want to reward you two for everything you've done to keep this place afloat. Their heads snapped up, twin looks of shock crossing their faces. Reward us? Sarah asked, her voice cautious, like she was waiting for the catch. Ethan smiled faintly. Tyler, you've shown incredible loyalty and leadership, even in the short time you've been here. I'm promoting you to assistant manager. You'll get a raise and more consistent hours. Tyler's jaw dropped, his hands freezing on his apron. Wait, are you serious? I've never managed anything before. You're already doing it, Ethan said, his smile widening. You've been stepping up when no one else would. That's what leadership looks like. Tyler blinked, his face a mix of shock and gratitude. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Ethan turned to Sarah. And you, Sarah, 8 months of dedication, even when things were at their worst. I see how much you care about the customers, about your team. You deserve more than a pat on the back. Her eyes shimmered, and she quickly looked down, her cheeks flushing. I'm just doing my job, she murmured, embarrassed. You're doing more than that, Ethan said gently. Starting next week, I'm giving you a significant pay raise. And I'm setting up a bonus system for the staff hard work, like yours needs to be recognized. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her voice breaking as she whispered, Oh my God, really? Really, Ethan said, his smile steady. You've earned it. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of his promises settling over the booth like a warm blanket. Then Sarah's voice came, soft and trembling. Thank you. I mean it, thank you. Ethan leaned back, the tension in his chest easing for the first time all day. You don't need to thank me, he said. This is what this place should have been all along. They spent the next half hour talking, Ethan laying out more plans, asking for their input. He promised to update the outdated equipment, the grill that smoked too much, the coffee machine that groaned like it was dying, and implement a better scheduling system. He wanted regular meetings with the team, a chance to hear their concerns, straight from the source. By the time they left the booth, Sarah and Tyler looked lighter, their steps less burdened, like the storm cloud over the diner had finally started to lift. The next few weeks were a blur of action. Ethan kept his word, spending long days at Elmwood, his hoodie swapped for a plain button-up as he worked alongside the staff. He interviewed candidates for the manager position himself, settling on Laura Bennett, not his assistant, but a seasoned woman with a warm smile and a firm handshake. She'd run a small cafe for years, and her empathetic style won over the team fast. Ethan approved raises for Sarah and Tyler, brought in 3 new hires to ease the workload, and ordered new equipment, a gleaming grill, a quieter coffee maker. He watched the diner transform, piece by piece. Customers noticed too. Service sped up. The staff smiled more real smiles, not the strained ones Ethan had first seen. One afternoon, an older woman with a cane stopped him near the counter. This place feels different, she said, her voice crackling with age. Like it used to years ago. Ethan nodded, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. That's the idea. On his last day before heading back to headquarters, Sarah caught him by the door, her apron slung over her shoulder. Hey, she sighed, her smile small but genuine. I just wanted to say this place feels different now. Better. Like it actually matters. Ethan paused, looking back at the dining area. Tyler directing a new hire, Laura chatting with a customer, the hum of a busy but happy shift. It does matter, he said, meeting her eyes. And so do you. He stepped outside, the late afternoon, sun warm on his face, and walked to his SUV. Sliding into the driver's seat, he glanced at the diner one last time, the red and white sign glowing faintly in the light. For the first time in years, he felt the spark he'd had when he started this chain, a sense of purpose beyond profits. He started the engine, a plan already forming for the other 12 locations. Elmwood was just the beginning. Ethan Carter stood outside the Elmwood diner, the late afternoon sun dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. The red and white Carter's Hearth sign swayed gently in the breeze, its faded edges catching the light. Inside, the hum of a busy shift carried through the glass laughter from a table of regulars, the clink of dishes as Tyler coached a new hire, Laura's warm voice greeting a family at the door. Ethan adjusted the strap of his jacket over his shoulder, his SUV keys jingling in his hand. Today was his last day here, at least for now, and the weight of the past few weeks settled over him like a quiet victory. The diner had changed more than he'd expected. Service flowed smooth and fast. Customers lingered with smiles instead of complaints, and the staff moved with a lightness he hadn't seen that first day. Sarah darted between tables, her step steady, her smile real now, not the strained mask he'd glimpsed before. Tyler, clipboard in hand, checked inventory with a confidence that belied his months on the job. Larver wove it all together, her calm presence steadying the team like an anchor. Ethan watched through the window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. This was what he built Carter's Hearth, for a place that felt like home for everyone who walked through the door. He turned to his SUV, sliding into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. His notebook lay on the passenger seat, its pages filled with scribbled plans, not just for Elmwood, but for the other 12 locations. He'd been blind too long, trusting reports while the heart of his company frayed. That ended now. He'd visit every diner, meet every team, hear their stories. Numbers mattered, but people mattered more. Sarah's quiet resilience, Tyler's unspoken loyalty, the customers who'd stuck around despite the cracks. This wasn't just about fixing one mess. It was about reclaiming his promise. Ethan started the car, the engine rumbling to life, and glanced back at the diner one last time. Sarah stepped outside to wave, her apron slung over her arm, her smile bright against the dusk. He waved back, a warmth spreading through his chest. He'd come here looking for the truth behind forced smiles and found something better, a chance to rebuild, to lead the way he should have from the start. As he pulled onto the road, the horizon stretching wide ahead, Ethan felt a pride he hadn't known in years. Carter's Hearth wasn't just a chain anymore, it was a legacy, and he'd fight to keep it alive. This story isn't just a tale of a CEO uncovering rot in his own company. It's a mirror held up to anyone who's ever lost sight of what matters. Ethan Carter's journey starts with a spark of doubt and ends with a quiet triumph, showing us that leadership isn't about power or profits, it's about people. He walks into Elmwood expecting to find slow service or sloppy work, but what he discovers is deeper. A team stretched thin, a manager who traded respect for control, and his dream slipping away. His choice to dig in, to listen, to act, turns a broken diner into a beacon of what could be. This story's power lies in its quiet revolution. Ethan doesn't shout or strut. He watches, learns, and builds. It's a reminder that the smallest places, like a suburban diner, can hold the biggest truths. And that's why we tell tales like this on Legacy Stories, to uncover the grit, the heart, the lessons that stick with you. If Ethan's fight to reclaim his dream moved you, if Sarah's smile or Tyler's loyalty hit home, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button on Legacy Stories. Join us for more tales that dig deep, that inspire, that show what it means to stand up and stand together. Share this with your friends, your family, anyone who needs a nudge to look closer at their own world. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story where legacies aren't just told, they're lived.